Let's try speak English because I think that our audience will understand English better than Russian because it's more people and because if I want, I will make some small translation.
That sounds good to me.
What was happened when you came to Donbass and began to support DNR, LNR, Crimea? What was happened? It's unfashionable in Great Britain. What was happened to you exactly?
I wouldn't say I support, as a correspondent, I supported, for example, I was anti-Maidan, you could say. I didn't support Maidan, it's certainly true, because there was nothing to support. There was nothing that I could see, either as a person or as a correspondent, to support in Maidan. It was terrorism. It was terrorism in its purest, or even dirtiest and most banal but blatant and brazen form in its manifestations. Crimea, I supported the voice of the people, the referendum there, which represented the overwhelming will of the vast majority of those in Crimea, of Narod, as you say in Russian, in Crimea. And I wanted to represent that view to the world, the fact that it was a real referendum that delivered a result which reflected the real wishes and the real will of the people. And in terms of supporting DNR, I guess I have this on my phone, but you have to understand I support what the people also in Donbass voted for, which is for their own republic. So it's more than, or it's a little different to supporting. I recognise the DNR and I recognise them as they exist. They are real entities. The DNR and LNR, they exist. They're real, and so I support the recognition of them as entities, as republics. And I do believe that, for example, in someone like Slavyansk and in Mariupol, the Ukrainians are there illegally, in as much as there were referendums, and so the Ukrainians are occupying that territory as opposed to being there legitimately. Because Maidan, it wasn't democratic. It was an overthrow of a government which was flawed, a president who was flawed, but which was nonetheless legitimate, legal. I'd even been at the election in Kiev in 2012 and seen it. That was a real election that delivered a government, a party of regions government, which had a mandate to govern, which Euromaidan decided to overthrow, which they did. And they installed a coup government, referred to as a junta, junta, that was illegal, illegitimate, unelected, unmandated, unvoted for. And for me, to see the Western world pass it off as some triumph of a revolution was just staggering. It was our parliament even misled by William Hague. It was a complete misappropriation of the essence of the ideology of the very being of democracy. And so I absolutely supported the rights of those in Ukraine who didn't recognise that Euromaidan post-coup thrown together, basically just a hodgepodge of far-right elements of party Svoboda and the Pravi sector that put themselves in power. I mean, all that was a coup, a junta. And so I did support the rights of people who then declared that Ukraine had effectively nullified itself, that Ukraine had effectively chosen to dissemble, to dismantle itself. Because if you don't have democracy, if you don't have a rule of government, and if you have a situation which was a clear threat to spill into anarchy, a clear danger, then you do have, as people on a territory, as people who live on a land, a right to protect yourself against what may come as a result of that, which was going to be, in any case, war. There's no question that those people that put themselves in power, that Maidan put in power, basically already declared a war against the East, against those people who were ethnic Russians or who allied themselves with Russian. In terms of even the first laws, one of the first raft of laws passed was to outlaw the Russian language effectively, or to at least overturn Yanukovych's incorporation of the Russian language into the Ukrainian lexicon. So I absolutely supported the right of the people to opt out of that and to declare that they didn't accept that. And I do believe that was when Ukraine died, was when Euromaidan triumphed, if you can call it that. That was the day that Ukraine died, and that was Ukraine that I had lived in for over 2 years, had liked a lot as a country. But with Maidan, there was nothing to like, nothing to support. And it was a sad day, and it was sad to say that the day that Ukraine died, it was February the 22nd of 2014, because that was when Ukraine decided that it wasn't going to adhere to law, it wasn't going to comply with democratic accepted standards of democratic government, of the principles of democratic government. It was going to basically self-destruct. Ukraine chose to hit the self-destruct button, and it did exactly that. There isn't, I mean, Ukraine now exists as just a swear word in the East. It exists as a memory in Crimea. It exists as a country which unfortunately has now chosen to associate itself with the shelling of civilians, with the murder of civilians, with the carrying out of a genocidal war in Donbass. That's what Ukraine is now, sad as it is to say, for those of us who had an affinity for Ukraine.
It was very, very long answer, and I have no notebook book to sign up answers about every fact you told me. But okay, at first you told that elections in Ukraine was illegal, but why Poroshenko was elected and
well, Poroshenko was elected on May the 25th was the date that Poroshenko was the presidential elections were held. But then already you'd had then February, March, April, so you'd already by that time had 3 months of a government which was illegal, which had installed itself into power after Maidan, and you didn't have parliamentary elections until October. So by that time you already had 8 months of unelected government. And Poroshenko's election you could even question because that wasn't held in the East. So for example, he declares himself the president of a Ukraine which still includes the LNR and the DNR in his mind, but they didn't vote in the presidential election. They didn't vote in that. And his election itself is questionable in many ways, in as much as it just wasn't held in so many territories. So, but the parliamentary aspect of it, I mean, there's no way that you could. I mean, they basically kicked out Yanukovych, but then kicked out the Party of Regions, and then declared all these measures such as lustration to basically strip the Communist Party, to completely dismantle the Communist Party. But the party that drove this, Svoboda, received about exactly the same amount of proportion of the vote in 2012, around 10%, as the Communist Party. So it's basically a party that had for a long time been even smaller, suddenly declaring the dissolution of the Communist Party, which regularly in elections got 10% of the vote. And this was a party, Svoboda, which up until 2012 had got from 0.7 up until 5 and whatnot, and then hit 10%. But it was still, in fact, as I recall, it still got even fewer. It was even smaller proportionally. So the party that declared the doing away of the Communist Party got fewer proportionate votes as a percent. So it was absurd. It was a farce. You had in a few days you had several prime ministers. Then you'd one that went off to Russia, and then Turchinov was installed, and Yatsenyuk, and the whole farce. The whole scenario was just exactly that. It was a farce. So.
Okay, it will be a very straight question. Are you pro-Russian? Are you pro-Putin's?
I like Russia, of course, but I liked Ukraine also before Maidan, and I still feel, for a lot of us who kind of had that feeling that Ukraine was something which wasn't Russia before, it had its own identity, and that was something which I liked. I mean, I never thought that Ukraine was, when I lived in Ukraine was Russia. Ukraine had its own character, its own colour. But Maidan split it into two. So Maidan split the West, and before you had a nice kind of cross intermixing and interface of the East and West of Ukraine. So you had, the Ukrainian traditional, the typical in the West, and you had then the more Russian side in the East, but you had a nice kind of combination of all of them existing quite happily across all of Ukraine. But I witnessed elements in 2012 in Kiev that threatened to tear that apart, and they did, and then they tore Ukraine apart. And that's as it is. So I feel quite sad in some ways that country that we knew, that Ukraine, will never exist again as it did, and it never can, and it never will, and it'll never be the same. That's the whole illusion, the absolute fallacy of this belief of the Maidaners, is that they can somehow restore Ukraine, which will never be as it was. And they need to accept that if you supported Maidan, you made that decision. You basically self-destructed your own country. And I filmed in Maidan. I knew these people, and I had a feeling that what was going to happen was going to be bad, although I never expected how bad it would be. it must be said. As for my being pro-Russian, I've always liked Russia, just as I liked Ukraine, just as I like a lot of countries. I've travelled quite extensively across the world, I guess. I like a lot of countries. I like, Brazil. I like any number of countries in Europe, the Baltics I've even been to the States. It's hard to say I like America now. I guess I like America as a country, but not so much the politics. Australia, Japan. I like Russia, of course. I like Russia a lot. I think Russia is a wonderful country. But that doesn't really mean that my journalism is pro-Russian or that I'm pro-Putin. I mean, I hardly ever speak about Putin. I've never, for example, interviewed him. I've never filmed a piece about Putin, and people call me, whatever at the opposition meeting, a Putin propagandist and everything. But I mean, if you look at my work and how much it features Putin, hardly ever. I mention him, for example, when it comes to the food convoys or what he does for Donbass, to support Donbass. But if I've ever done a piece, like Putin is great and this and that, I never have, because I mean, I'm objective about him. I think he's a good leader and a strong leader of Russia, and I respect him for that. But as for being his PR or something, I'm absolutely not. And as for there being any contact between us and Putin and me, I mean, he was in Crimea twice, and I didn't even, for me, I don't even know if I could interview him. I mean, I haven't put in an application. I would definitely like to in the future. But this idea that I somehow work for the Kremlin is a complete myth. I've never worked for them, never had any dealings in a journalistic level with the Kremlin, never in any way been told to put forward a pro-Russian position. If you film 1,000 people in Donbass that are pro-Russian, then that doesn't mean that your journalism is pro-Russian. That just means that they're pro-Russian. And my journalism mostly is just filming people and reflecting what they say. As for my own politics, I like Russia, respect Russia, but I think any sensible person, any intelligent person, how can you not respect a country like Russia, which is a great nation of culture and history and wonder? I absolutely respect Russia and like Russia on a personal level. Of course I do. But that doesn't feed into my journalism. That doesn't make my journalism, pro-Russia kind of put out, or in any way, a kind of exercise in Russia promotion. Everything's sincere from the heart. And I'm British, and I love Great Britain. I've never asked for a Russian passport. I'm proud to be British. I love Great Britain. That's my country. That I'm biased about is Great Britain. Russia, I like a lot and respect. But I think any intelligent, educated person should feel exactly the same about Russia.
No problem, but I know the same journalist like you who tells that no, I'm not pro-Putin, I'm not pro-Russian, but we know exactly that he will never tell us anything bad about Russian outside politics, about DNR, LNR politics, and we know this exactly. And because of that, a lot of Ukrainian TV, newspapers, internet tells that he's pro-Russian. He takes money from Putin, for example. And it's a very easy joke. Can you tell us something bad about Russian outside politics? Or LNR, DNR, something bad.
About the LNR and DNR, I'm always, I'm not happy about the situation at the moment in the Donetsk People's Republic, this closing of the war hospital in Donetsk, and I've spoken out against that, and I think that's a very, very poor decision to close the war hospital in Donetsk. As for the LNR, as for their leadership, the political situation, that isn't something that I would comment on, but I think if I'm not going to comment on it, then it's understandable how I feel about that situation. In terms of Russia, what I would say is, I went to the opposition meeting last week, filmed people who were enemies, who were anti-Putin, and filmed exactly what they had to say. I mean, I filmed a man, I said to him, "What's better than Putin?" And he said, "My ass," was his answer. So I filmed that and put that out as a piece, all opposition sentiment. So I show everything. I was in Crimea, I filmed people who were pro-Ukrainian, I filmed a guy who shouted "Slava Ukraine" on the street, I filmed a girl who said that the Russian government, she thought the decisions being made were moronic. I mean, how many people there are pro-Ukrainian? Less than 10%. But I filmed them, and I filmed a woman who was strongly critical of Russia and the status of Crimea as Russia. So, you know, I've filmed any number of things, and anybody that goes on about, for example, me I get hit with sometimes supposedly accidentally showing information, whatnot, supposedly Russian tanks in Debaltseve that I film, but I don't care. You know, I show everything, film everything. There was no evidence that they were Russian tanks. You can say that they were or they weren't, but unless you actually were there and could prove that, it's only speculation. But this that I accidentally showed them was absolute a myth. I show everything always as it is, all the time, without any censoring or any concealing.
What is your relationship to religion?
No, I'm not religious, so I'm no religion. I respect it, and I respect the work that the church does in Donbass. That religion means a lot to people there, and particularly in a time of war. So I mean, before maybe I would have said that I was an atheist, but I appreciate religion now. I appreciate the fact that it gives people hope, it gives people belief. So I respect religion, but I'm not religious in any way myself.
Okay, what is your relationships to homosexual people?
Fine, absolutely fine. I'm cool and understanding. I mean, if you're looking at times, for example, that my position is different to Russia. There was the referendum in Scotland that Russia really, I guess, supported Scotland's independence, but I wanted the United Kingdom to stay together. And about homosexuals, I understand that in Russia that isn't popular as a subject. But how do I feel about homosexuality? Completely okay with it. I don't mind it. To me, it's a non-subject. Homosexuality. If someone's homosexual, it's just a non-subject. And they can march or it just to me it just is a non-subject. It's a nothing to me. People can do what they like.
Okay, it's. Good answer. So the third question is, what is your relationship to smoking?
I don't smoke, but I don't mind smoking also. Equally, I'm not against smoking. If people want to smoke, then they can do that. They should be able to do that. I mean, it's in Russia now. It's quite sort of strict in terms of you can't smoke in a lot of places and whatnot, and they enforce that law. I remember they tried it in Ukraine, but then everyone just started, there's real differences I mean, people have to sort of accept that when they talk about Russia and Ukraine, the countries were always different, and in a lot of ways, that difference was that Ukraine was a country that had a certain lawlessness, always had a certain anarchy. I mean, in Ukraine, I remember you could buy your way into the border. They changed the visa system, so you couldn't really get visas to Ukraine. So then they made it so you just pay the border guards a bribe, basically, and that was the system. Every time you got stopped by traffic police, it was money. They couldn't really impose any law to stop smoking. People just started smoking. Ukraine was always sort of lawless, and that was part of its charm. Russia, is a country that has a system, has a structure, has law, has a police that don't take bribes, has a functioning state organ administration, is a country with order, and that is, when people talk about Russia, they should realise that they're talking about a developed country. This idea of European standards, when I look at the refugee situation in Europe now and the chaos there, and the way that Europe is being just completely dismantled, if you like, from the inside. Then you look at Russia, you could almost say that Russia in a lot of ways it sets examples in terms of
У вас все так получилось хорошо.
In terms of immigration, you had about 150 people an hour entering Germany from Syria or whatever last week. Russia's a country that controls its borders and that has a strength. I look at the EU and see bedlam and chaos, and it's sort of strange that Ukraine has pulled itself apart to be a part of the EU, which is already falling apart. I mean, believe me, the EU won't exist as it does now in 5 years, but Russia will. And I don't sort of say this as any proponent of Russia as the all answer, the kind of the solution, the absolute, the paragon, the epitome. But what I do say is the Russia that you read about in the Western press, the Russia that gets so much stick, so much criticism from US-backed and funded propaganda, that is just that. That's a fictionalization. To be here, the real Russia, you see yourself that we're here. You know, we were in the park just there for 2 hours. The police came over and politely asked me to stop flying the drone. But there's law, order, a structure, a system, and that's real Russia. And I'm also really looking forward to the World Cup here in 2018. So I mean, you know, people would do themselves a lot of good to look beyond what they're kind of spoon-fed about Russia, because it's lies.
I will tell you a small secret, but police have not any... не имела права на самом деле просить выключить дрон.
No, ani imеет права. Ты знаешь, что дрон нету закона об этом поводу. Это все сейчас по этому поводу with flying drones. There isn't any law about it, but in a domestic area, in a built-up area like this, you do need permission to fly a drone. Because I mean, imagine yourself now; those drones are like $1,500. In a year, they'll be $500. If everyone is flying drones, can you imagine? At the moment, there just isn't really a law, but there's airspace around. The law is in cities, flying drones is a bit of a no, but you know, you sometimes get permission and whatnot. I didn't ask for that today because I thought the answer might be no. But you know, you saw that they were all right and they were fine. And I remember in Odessa getting stopped by the Ukrainian police, and it was just money every single time. But you know, I don't want to get put in a position of sort of you know, putting myself out to be like some sort of PR guy for Russia and all bad Ukraine, because I liked Ukraine. Ukraine, whatever it was, whatever its failings, always had a certain charm. And Russia, you know, like I say, I'm not PRing Russia, but it's a lovely country. And I think if you could make the case that, you know, you were PRing Russia, you would say that the weight of the world is against it. So, you know, Russia sort of, it needs to defend itself. I mean, when everyone talks about RT, Russia Today, and supposed, you know, Russian propaganda, you have to understand the rest of the world is against Russia. So you can legitimize that, even if it were the case, which I don't say is. I don't say that's the case, that they are propaganda. Even if it were, you could say that Russia has the right to defend itself against the world's media that is just bent against Russia, sadly. And in the case of the BBC, shamefully so, particularly the BBC.
Okay, last small question. Do you earn your money only because of YouTube commercials?
No, I mean, that's a part of my income, the main part. But also, if you notice on my YouTube, there's a button for people to donate. So it's crowdfunding. This is like the, you know, the kind of way.
Crowdfunding?
The way it's become. No, когда люди пожертвовали, допустим, crowdfunding. So when it's become that way that basically that people, you know, donate, and that's kind of the new sort of way that, you know, that businesses are run, that magazines and websites are funded and the projects are funded. But it's just normal people that donate, like sometimes $20 or $30. And if you add that, if you combine that with my YouTube and the fact that I sometimes put videos into agency, I sell videos to agency sometimes, then I make, you know, a low income, but I'm a modest man. I don't need much money, and I don't care about money, and I earn enough to live. But if you look at my life, it's, you know, a modest life in terms of how I live, and you know, go about my business and my tastes and everything. It's a modest life, and that's one that, you know, is absolutely cool, and I'm happy, and wouldn't want it to be any different. I mean, I don't want to work for any channel. I like to do my own thing, like to be free, and like to, you know, do my own thing. And I think it's good that people understand that I don't report to any channel, and that I am completely independent, and that's